Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the Kupyansk frontline. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to discover 3 commandos groups in this area. Mainly those commandos groups were working in the vicinity of Novosilovska. The Russians managed to spot them, discover and destroy. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system D-30 howitzer. If we compare this number with the previous days, this is the highest number since the beginning of February, I believe so. Yesterday, the Ukrainians lost just 25 soldiers on that front line, 70 soldiers the day before yesterday, and when talking about the 26th of February, just 60 soldiers. So that means that these numbers can say that the Russians maybe maybe they activated in this front line, and maybe they started pushing in direction of Sinkovka. If we are talking about the soldiers and experts on the ground, there were no reports about that. So let's wait another update, and if tomorrow we're going to see the same numbers or the same level of Ukrainian losses on this front line, that means that the Russians started some offensive operation on the north on Kupyansk front line, and maybe we can expect for more developments on the ground from the Russian side. Now let's move to the Liman front line. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. The Russians actively uses their new T-90 tanks in this area. They reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 150 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, 1 D-30 howitzer and another M-Stab-B howitzer. As you can see, the Russians continue their offensive operation, support offensive operation. They're still pinning down the Ukrainians in this area. They're not allowing them to redeploy some parts from Liman front line in direction of Bakhmut. Now let's talk about Bakhmut. As you can see, the Russian sources map hasn't been updated, but if we take a look at the Western sources map, this map has been updated. As you can see, now this map shows about some progress on the north of Bakhmut, on the south of Berkhovka, and on the west from Yahidne. So the Russians continue encirclement process of Bakhmut. Today, somewhere at noontime, the Russians reported about some progress in the south of Bakhmut, and as a result of clashes, they managed to enter the south part, and to be more precise, the south square where the foreign volunteers like to make photo. There is a statue of MiG-25 airplane. So the Russians entered this area. Maybe by the evening the Ukrainians managed to push them back, but as you can see, the Russians have almost completed the physical encirclement of Bakhmut. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians lost 190 soldiers, 18 armored vehicles and 2 howitzers, D-20 and D-30. As you can see, the level of the Ukrainian losses is still high, so that means that there is still culmination of battle for Bakhmut. But if we analyze these numbers that Ministry of Defense provided about the clashes on Donetsk front line, the number of Ukrainian losses is not the most important number, because we see that the level is very high. And we need to understand, there are a lot of questions, of course, about Bakhmut. The questions like how long the Ukrainians are able to support this town, how long the Ukrainians are able to hold this front line, and so on. The most important question, when the Russians are able to encircle Bakhmut, will be able to encircle Bakhmut and to create a cauldron. And to receive an answer to this question, we need to analyze not the numbers about the losses among the manpower, because they're very high almost every single day since the beginning of January. If we want to understand whether there is encirclement of Bakhmut or not, we need to analyze the number of losses among the armored vehicles. What does it mean? Because as you understand, when talking about the clashes inside the Bakhmut, inside the town, mainly the Ukrainian soldiers take positions inside buildings, industrial zones, and using these positions, they're attacking the Russian soldiers who try to storm this town using the sniper rifles, using some tank pods and so on. And there are not much places to use armored vehicles inside Bakhmut. There are not much places, and mainly the Ukrainians uses armored vehicles with one purpose. There are a lot of purposes, but the most important purpose of using armored vehicles is supplying and supporting Bakhmut with manpower, with shells, with ammo, with exchange process of, let's say, wounded soldiers, to take wounded soldiers from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar and so on. And also it's very important to analyze the number of types of vehicles that were destroyed during this or that day. And today the Minister of Defense reported that as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 18 armored vehicles. And furthermore, they added that there are 16 just regular light vehicles that were destroyed during the previous 24 hours. And you need to understand that there are, at least for now, there are just two ways how the Ukrainians are able to supply Bakhmut. As we discussed, one road from Chasiv Yar through the small town by the name of Canal in direction of Khromovo, and the second road is almost the same way but through the local roads in the same direction of this small block on the west of Bakhmut. And the increased level of destroyed vehicles, to be more precise, of light vehicles, says that the Russians managed to establish very powerful, very tough fire control over these supply roads. Because if we compare the numbers, these numbers, the Russians reported that yesterday on Donetsk frontline, the Ukrainians lost just 6 armored vehicles. So as you can see today, during the previous 24 hours, 18, including 16 regular vehicles that Ukrainians uses to on these roads to supply Bakhmut with ammo, shell, and so on. When talking about the day before yesterday, the Ukrainians lost just 11 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks, so that means that they lost just 9 vehicles in this area. On the 26th of February, they lost 7 armored vehicles. On the 25th of February, they lost 3 armored vehicles, and on the 24th, 15 armored vehicles, including 2 tanks. So we need to analyze this number, and we need to understand what we're going to see tomorrow. But the high level of losses among armored vehicles, at least if you want to hear my opinion, I believe that this number tell us that the Russians establish a very tough physical control over the roads. The Western sources are saying, and the Russians confirms, that the Ukrainians still have possibility to use these roads at night, but highly unlikely they're able to use these roads during the day. So all these numbers tell me that the Russians have already established tactical encirclement, and that every single road that goes to Bakhmut is under tough and very powerful fire control. And this is very important. We need to understand this number tomorrow, because if tomorrow we are going to see the same level of losses among armored vehicles on Donetsk frontline, that means that maybe it's not even a tactical encirclement, and maybe it's already a cauldron. And if the level is going to be very high, the Russian sources are saying that there are around 3,000, not less than 3,000 soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, still in Bakhmut. And if the Russians are able to destroy such a big number of vehicles during the day, imagine yourself the losses of Ukrainians if they take a decision to step back from this town. To tell the truth, I don't believe that it's already possible to do. I believe it's highly unlikely Ukrainians are able to step back. I don't know the plans of Ukrainians in this area today. Some Western sources, Ukrainian sources, are saying that the head of defense operation of Bakhmut took a decision to create a real fortification in Ivanovsk. He still thinks that the Ukrainians are able to hold Bakhmut, and we understand that this local road between Bakhmut and Ivanovsk is the living road that Ukrainians can use with very heavy losses. Maybe during night they can do this, but this is the only road that keeps Bakhmut alive. And when talking about the road through Khromovo, this road is already under fire control, and there are not much places where the Ukrainians are able to prepare their fortification, and they don't have time to build new fortifications along the fields. in the Ukrainians, the Russians have superiority in artillery systems, and no matter what they can build on in the fields, the Russians will reduce these fortifications till ruins and till ground. So Ivanovska is the focal point, and the question how long the Ukrainians are able to hold Bakhmut, we can find by asking ourselves how long the Ukrainians are able to hold Ivanovska. As we discussed, the defense like triangle. So this is the base and this is the head. And if the Russians are able to take the head, the entire defense will be collapsed automatically. So for now, the south of Bakhmut is the most important part. The Russians continue attacking from the north. They're attacking Dubovo-Vasilievka, Orekhovo-Vasilievka, just to short the front lines, to increase the power and to develop their bridgehead, their positions around Bakhmut, and not to allow the Ukrainians to start their own counteroffensive operation. Because yes, we see that the Russians mainly they attack in direction of Bakhmut, but don't forget that Ukrainians also have possibilities to attack the Russians in some kind of not in a very good period of time, and they can be collapsed and can be forced to step back. So the situation is very difficult, and for now it's the optimism of Ukrainian military authorities tells me that they're not stupid. They're not stupid, believe me. The optimism of Ukrainian authorities tells me that they have some plan. And this, I hope, and I not hope, but I believe that the Russians have some understanding of this plan, and they understand the risk. I believe they have some management of the risks. I don't know, but anyway, if the Ukrainians have plan, that means that not everything is so good in Russian favor. So they need to be very careful, and let's see what is going to be next. But anyway, I believe that we can say that today is the first day of the real tactical encirclement of Bakhmut, when every single road that goes from Chasov Yar to Bakhmut is under real fire control. Now let's go further to the Donetsk. As you can see, the Ukrainians continue attacking this town. Furthermore, today the Ukrainians started mining Donetsk using the distance method of mining one more time. We remember that they used to do this in the previous year, somewhere in autumn, during the autumn and during the late summer, and now they start doing this one more time. I believe that this is connected. This situation is connected with the weather. I believe that there are no more snow, and it is very difficult to see and to discover the mines on the ground with this weather. So it's perfect place, perfect period of time when the Ukrainians are able to mine, and they can increase the losses among the casualties among the civilians and military forces in Donetsk during these days. The Russians continue their offensive operation in Pesky front line. They're trying to develop, and they need to complete the mission with Pervomaiska if they want to continue their further operation in direction of Avdiivka. But for now, there are no changes. That's the video and photo confirmation of some actions that the Russians made during the previous days and during the previous hours. If we're talking about Ugledar, more and more Russian sources are saying about the failure from the Russian side during the offensive operation in direction of Ugledar. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of clashes on the Ugledar, South Donetsk and Zaporozhye front line, the Ukrainians lost 80 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. Furthermore, the Ukrainians lost another howitzer D-30. But there are no changes on the ground as well. I believe that there are still heavy clashes in the vicinity of Ugledar, but Ugledar still under Ukrainian control. And this is the most important. No matter the losses, no matter the greatest or not greatest offensive operation, Ugledar is still under the Ukrainians. If we are talking about Kherson, when talking about Kherson, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of clashes in this town, on this front line, the Ukrainians lost 85 soldiers and 16 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. And these numbers are very interesting, because this is not the first day when the Russians had included information about Kherson. And if we're talking about yesterday, for example, the Ukrainians haven't lost anything, but the day before yesterday, the Ukrainians lost another 60 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. And as you can see, there are no clashes. there are no combat line in this area. There is no real combat line where two armies can meet each other on the battlefield and to attack each other and to kill each other and destroy each other. There is a river, and there are just artillery duels. And as I see, the Russians are pretty effective and successful during these artillery duels. The Ukrainian losses are very high, and they're losing ammo depots, they're losing manpower. For example, on the 26th of February, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers and 6 armored vehicles. As we discussed, I believe that there are a lot of Russian agents on this bank of the river who provide a lot of interesting information and positive, nice information for the Russians. They're using this information to navigate and to target their artillery systems, and we see the result of those duels. Furthermore, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes, of artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost another ammo depot of 123rd Territory Defense in the town of Alexandrovka. And that's it about the situation on the ground. Now let's talk about other important topics, and I would like to discuss with you the possible, and I believe, according to my understanding of the situation, possible mobilization from the Russian side. If you know, the Russians in this small region in Moldova, Transnistria, Transnistria, announced about, let's say a mobilization, but read this in quotes. The Russians starting some kind of trainings, some kind of learnings, military trainings, military exercises on this territory, and they are saying that anybody who wants to join these forces can take a weapon and join some kind of militia or something like this in this area. And this is some kind of silent mobilization, because I believe that there are lots of retired people from 55 years who consider themselves the Russians and who don't want any problems in this region. So that's why I believe these guys took this mobilization and these trainings mainly for them. So they will join this army, and furthermore they will receive some salary, because the Russians promised to pay a lot who is going to join this army, and I believe for this region this is a very good army. And furthermore, the Russians just want to increase the number of forces in this area, and as I understand, they're not planning to give up, and this is some kind of plan B, to start some partial mobilization in this area, just to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to start their own offensive operation in this area. Furthermore, if you remember, the Western airplanes companies of Europe took a decision to stop any flights on above the territory of Moldova starting from 15th of March. So within the last 15 days, there are going to be no airplanes on above the territory of Moldova. What does it mean? We understand when the countries and when the companies take such a decision, and the only reason why they take such a decision, if they know or there are a lot of risks that somewhere at this period of time there are going to be some clashes and military things. So that's why they want to reduce the losses, of course, among their air fleet or something like this. So I expect that somewhere on the 15th of March, maybe we can see some actions in the small region of Moldova. It's exactly fit the timings of stepping back and let's say retreating from Bakhmut. I believe that somewhere by the 15th of March the Russians will be able to take control over Bakhmut, or the Ukrainians will take a decision to step back, and right after this they will start their operation in Transnistria or Transnistria, when talking about in English translation. So this is about small mobilization that the Russians took a decision to make in this small region, but this is not about the global Russian mobilization. Now let's talk about the Russian mobilization. According to my understanding of this situation, the Russians are planning to make 2 waves of mobilization within this year, and the first one they will do somewhere in April, in the beginning of April or in the end of March. So let's say that somewhere from 20th or 25th of March, 20th of March till the middle of April, the Russians will start another wave of mobilization. Why is that? Why the Russians should start mobilization exactly at this period of time? Why the Russians haven't started mobilization earlier, before, in January and February? And I'll tell you that we can try to find a lot of explanations, a lot of theories why the Russians haven't started mobilization yet, why they're planning to do this later or tomorrow or something like this. There might be a lot of explanations, and I understand that we need to search the explanation, the easiest, the most understandable, the most simplest explanation of this situation. And the thing is that, I found such explanation, but it's not my idea. Some Russian military experts raised this topic a few days ago, maybe weeks ago, and he gave a very interesting explanation of this situation. I would like to share with you his opinion. First of all, we need to understand that now it's winter. Just the first step of explanation why the Russians haven't started mobilization and why they're going to start mobilization somewhere in the end of March, in the beginning of April. First of all, it's winter period of time. Just imagine yourself from the logical perspective that the Russians start mobilization in January, and they started trainings in January, in February, in March. According to the Russian program, they try to teach soldiers up to 3 years, and then they deploy the forces on the ground, on the front lines. So imagine yourself, the Russians teach the soldiers for 3 months in January, February, and March, and then they deploy the soldiers. They teach them in winter period of time, and then they deploy the forces in spring. So the soldiers are trained to fight in winter period of time, and when they are deployed, they see completely different picture. They see green leaves, they see the grass, and they see the spring. So it's not very smart to do this. So of course, if the Russians started mobilization in the end of the year, the previous year, and most of the soldiers were trained on the territory of Russian Federation, where there were a lot of snow, and when they were deployed, they saw the picture that they saw and they used to during the trainings. So everything is okay. And now the Russians will start mobilization somewhere in the end of March. They will spend up to 3 months to train these soldiers, and when they will deploy them somewhere in July and during the June, these soldiers will see the same picture as they see or saw during the training period. So it's logical and it's normal, and they will be very comfortable to the situation, and they will fit the requirements of the period of time when they deployed. This is the first explanation why the Russians haven't started mobilization in December and why they expect the end of March. Another explanation is the simple explanation, and I didn't thought this way, but when I heard this explanation, it was I understood the situation as well, is the uniform. So imagine yourself, if you want to start mobilization during the winter period of time, that means that you need to prepare a lot of winter uniform, a lot of this equipment, the coats, many shoes, and many other things. And imagine yourself, you're mobilizing 300,000 people. That you need to make 300,000 pieces of uniform. And after ending of these trainings, you need to provide them the spring uniform. And according to the Russian standards, they're changing the uniform 2 times a year. The first one in April, in the beginning of April, and the second one in the end, somewhere in autumn. So as you can see, in the end of March, in the beginning of April, is the time when the Russians are going to change their uniform from the winter to spring. And I remember the last year there were a lot of piece of news that the Russians during the summer period of time were producing significant number of winter uniform. And the same expert told us, it was somewhere in summer period of last year, he told that now the Russians light industry concentrated on preparation, on production of winter uniform. It was on summer, and he told that we need to expect another wave of mobilization somewhere by the end of this year, exactly at the time when the Russians can use this winter uniform. And the same expert told that told us that now, at winter period of time, the Russian industry completely concentrated on production of spring or summer uniform. So that means that they will start mobilization in the end of March. They will provide the spring uniform to these soldiers, and there are going to be no problems with deploying these forces, and there will be no problems with changing of industrial direction, that you don't need to produce like winter uniform and then to change and start production of spring uniform. So everything will be every single logistic issue will be solved by this. So this is the main two reasons why the Russians haven't started the mobilization process. The first one, they need to prepare the soldiers to fight during this summer. So that's why they need to prepare them, let's say, in summer situation or spring situation when there is no snow at least. And the second one is logistic and production problems. The Russians now are completely concentrated on preparation of spring summer uniform, and to start mobilization is best way to do this when you can provide these soldiers the spring or summer uniform. So this is the reason why I believe the Russians will start mobilization somewhere in the beginning of the spring, or in the end of March, in the beginning of April, and right after the situation with Bakhmut. And if the Ukrainians start offensive operation in Transnistria, this case the Russians can also use as the case to warm the interest of Russian civilians, Russian population, to join and to approve this situation with mobilization. And the second wave of mobilization will be somewhere in the end of this year, also the same situation, right at the same period of changing of uniform, somewhere in October of the 2023. And I believe and I hope that maybe this is going to be the final mobilization, and I hope that this conflict is going to be ended, if not in this year, but at least in the beginning of the next year. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you against the many violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.